This episode is proudly sponsored by HASA, the trusted choice for liquid chlorine. It's better because it offers the highest purity, works instantly, and contains no added CYA. By the bottom feeder, professional-grade battery-powered swimming pool vacuum system, it sucks to clean pools, so cleaning pools sucks less. Get $100 off the bottom feeder with code DVB100. Skimmer, trusted by over 30,000 pool service professionals across North America. Skimmer software helps you save time, grow revenue, and boost your 5-star reviews. Whether you're just starting out or expanding your team, Skimmer's easy-to-use tools and expert support have you covered. Upgrade your business in 2025 with Skimmer. Try Skimmer for 30 days for free at getskimmer.com/poolguy.
The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show.
Hi, welcome to the Pool Guy Podcast Show. In this episode, I'm going to talk to you about the pump basket. I'm going to go over all the details you're going to need to know about troubleshooting, why it's important, all the different aspects of the pump basket. It may not seem like something I could talk about for 15 or 20 minutes. I could probably spend an hour talking about the pump basket and all the intricacies of this particular part of the pool equipment. Join my coaching program and take your pool service to the next level. Connect with other pool pros in your area, gain valuable knowledge, and transform your business with personalized one-on-one advice from me. With over 36 years of experience, I'm here to help you succeed like never before. Learn more at poolguycoaching.com. I'll start by describing the pool pump itself. There are two components of the pump. There's the motor on back, either a single speed, dual speed, or variable speed motor. Then there is the front part on the pump, or the wet end, or the pump pot. It's hard to really define the front of the pump because people call it different things. They just call it the pump in general, and they don't distinguish the motor and the pump usually when they're describing it. So they may say, oh, my pump is not working, or my pump is leaking, and it could be leaking from somewhere in the front. It could be leaking from the seal that's in between the motor and the impeller, or it could be leaking from anywhere in the seal where the motor and the pump come together. So I like to refer to it as the wet end, and I think I'll refer to it as that in this podcast. You kind of know, and I'll keep things consistent here by calling it the wet end versus the pump pot, which I don't really like that description. It doesn't really describe it too well. Wet end is better because this is the end of the pump or the area where the water gets in, and the motor is a completely sealed element of the pump. Basically, there is a pump seal that's in between, a ceramic seal, in between the wet end of the pump and the motor of the pump. And inside the wet end is your pump basket. Now, depending on which pump you have varying sizes of pump baskets. You have varying, sizes of pumps in general. There's some gigantic pumps like the Jandy Stealth or the Hayward TriStar. There are some really small pumps with a small wet end, like the Pentair Superflow pump, which I consider a pretty small wet end. So if you go on Google and you pull up the Pentair Superflow VS, and then you pull up maybe a Hayward TriStar or Jandy Stealth pump, you're going to see that that pump basket is probably 4 times as big as the pump basket on the Superflow VS. Now, do you need a gigantic wet end pump basket area? I would say no, you do not. In fact, I would say that the larger the wet end, the more detrimental it is for the flow of the pool or for the upkeep of the pool. Now, this may sound contradictory because you would want to have a pump basket that holds 4 times as debris of a Superflow VS pump. It makes logical sense because then more debris can be in there and you don't have to worry about emptying it as much. But contrary to that thought is the reality of having a large wet end pump. They're a real pain to prime after removing the pump lid. They usually have a really thin O-ring, and priming a large pump is not the funnest thing to do, a large wet end pump I should say. Also, the debris getting in there, it's a misnomer that it can hold a ton of debris, which it can hold a ton of debris if it actually functioned with all that debris in the pump basket. Now, if you've been doing pool service for as long as I have, you realize the physics of it. it doesn't really matter how big the pump basket is if it's full of debris, because it's going to restrict the flow through the pump. So basically, behind the pump basket is the impeller of the pump. The impeller is what spins and pulls the water. It kind of channels it, kind of like a vortex. Think of like a tornado, and the bottom end of it is the part where the impeller's at, and the water's coming into the pump in a 2-inch pipe basically, and then it goes through the impeller in a small little quarter size or $half size opening, and then this is kind of what actually moves the water through the filter and back out the return jets. So if the pump basket is full of debris, it's going to restrict the flow of water through the wet end into the impeller, opening for the impeller, and out back the return lines. And that's why whenever you get to a pool, let's just say, I'll just keep it simple, it has a Pentair Whisper Flow, which is a medium-sized basket. I would say if you're comparing wet ends, the Pentair Whisper Flow would be a medium-sized pump basket. And if that's full of debris, it doesn't matter if that basket is 4 times as large as it is, it's still full of debris and it's still going to restrict the flow of water. So even though the larger wet ends can hold more debris, it's still the same physics. It doesn't matter because water is still not going to be able to go through the hole by the impeller and be pushed back out at a rapid pace. It'll slow the flow regardless of how big the pump basket is. Another drawback with the large pump baskets or the large pumps is that all the debris tends to be pulled to an area in front of the impeller. Again, you're talking about physics here. You have the water coming into the pipe, into the pump basket area. You have the debris coming into the pump basket. The debris is swirling around in there. So let's just imagine that you have some leaf debris, or let's say you have St. Augustine grass. The landscaper was there. He cut the grass. He blew all the clippings into the pool, which they generally like to do. It goes into the skimmer basket. The skimmer basket, the holes are not quite big enough to stop all the grass from getting through. So some of the St. Augustine grass passes through into the pump basket. And let's just say, for sake of argument, you have a Jandy Stealth pump that has a big wet end. Well, that St. Augustine grass is kind of swirling around inside the pump basket. Eventually, it's going to get waterlogged and it's going to settle down. What do you think that grass will settle down to? If you say at the bottom of the pump basket, on the, where it's at the floor of the pump on the bottom, kind of like where you're standing on a floor, you would be wrong, because where that St. Augustine grass will settle is right in front of the impeller hole in the pump basket. So just imagine the pump basket in the wet end, you have the little hole behind it where the impeller is at, and you have all the St. Augustine grass being pulled right in front of that impeller hole in the pump basket. It doesn't matter if the pump basket can hold a gallon of debris. If all of that St. Augustine grass goes right there into the little area in front of the impeller, it's going to slow the flow of that pool down. And so you can have just a small amount, maybe a handful of St. Augustine grass in that gigantic pump basket, and it's going to stop the flow or slow the flow down in a huge wet end. So I wouldn't say that you shouldn't get a pump with a huge wet end. I mean, there are some advantages of it. You have more head power, and you have a bigger area, but there's more problems with the larger pump wet end, is what I'm saying. I would settle for a medium whisper flow type wet end, or a smaller one like the Superflow VS pump wet end over a larger one any day of the week. When a customer puts in a gigantic pump with a giant wet end, or if I get a new account where I have one of those, like a Stealth, Jandy Stealth is one example, or Hayward TriStar, I don't like them. It's just one of those things that's more of a hassle. There's more chances for air to get in there with the O-ring on top. It's much harder to prime again, and it does no good as far as holding more debris. In fact, I find that the larger the wet end, the more likely the debris is going to get pulled in front of the impeller and cause that pump not to work effectively. Even dog hair in the pool, if you have a gigantic pump wet end like the Jandy Stealth, the dog hair will get pulled in there, and it'll just be pulled right in front of the impeller hole into the pump basket, kind of short-circuiting the whole idea of having a large wet end. So I would say there's a disadvantage for that. Now, of course, the advantage of it is if you do have a major windstorm, the skimmer basket gets torn and all the debris goes in there, it's going to keep the pool running, I guess, somewhat running to some extent, over the fact that if you had a whisper flow pump, the skimmer basket tore, all the debris went in there. Yes, the pool is not going to run. It'll probably stop running or stop flowing at some point with the smaller wet end. But the advantage of the smaller wet end is that they're much easier to prime, and there's no big advantage, in my opinion, over getting a giant wet end over a smaller wet end. You'll usually find the smaller wet ends or the medium wet ends on lower horsepower pumps, 1 horsepower, 1.5 horsepower. When you start getting into the, 3 total horsepower VS pumps, of course you're going to need a bigger wet end because it's going to have more flow, and you're going to need that extra flow before the impeller. So I'm not saying that you can get away with a small pump in a lot of situations. In most situations you can, and in most cases a 1.85 or 1.65 total horsepower VS pump is sufficient for like 80% of the pools out there, especially if you have a 1 horsepower existing pump or 1.5 horsepower. There's really not a lot of need to get a 3 total horsepower VS pump and get that giant wet end unless you want it. So I'm saying that there is advantages for the smaller pump wet ends, and that's easier maintenance. Now the whisper flow will still have the similar problem. If you had that same setup that I mentioned earlier with the Jandy Stealth on a pool with St. Augustine grass and it gets in there and clogs up the pump basket, it will tend to go right there in front of the impeller as well, in front of the whisper flow. And then you may have that basket crack. If you ever have seen pump baskets crack, they generally don't crack on the bottom. They generally don't crack on the front. The crack in a pump basket will be at the very end of it, at the very bottom where it sits right in front of the impeller, because that's where all the force is being pulled. If there's debris in that pump basket, it's going to crack that pump basket and it's going to pull the debris through and clog the impeller. One way to tell if your impeller is clogged, this is like a little side note here, is when you get to your pool or if you get to your service account, you turn on the pump and you notice that the PSI on the filter gauge is normally at 20 or 25 and it's at 12 or 10, and you see a lot of air in the lid of the pump itself. That's a good indicator that there's debris in the impeller. So what I normally do is I turn the system off, make sure it's not going to come back on. This is kind of important. I take the pump basket out. I'll get a flathead screwdriver. Some people make a device out of a hanger. I bet there's probably a tool on the market. I should look it up. But I stick the flathead screwdriver and I spin the impeller. And when you're doing that, you should hear a gurgling noise as the debris gets dislodged. Sometimes that's all it needs. Fill it back up with water, put the lid back on, and start the pump. And then that should solve that problem. And generally that's because debris may get pulled through the little area right there in front of the pump. Now Valpak does have heavy duty pump baskets. I kind of like those, but I kind of don't like them in some cases because they will get really impacted with debris. So if you ever use a Valpak whisper flow basket, it's really hard plastic, it's really thick, and it's going to last forever. The pump basket will never tear. And the fact that it'll never tear is a problem in itself, because if you do have a windstorm, all the debris gets past the skimmer into that Valpak basket. And if you've done service before, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You get to that pool and the whole equipment pad will be like shaking violently, like it's going to fall apart. You'll see the pump and all the plumbing moving and shifting, and you hear it going zhun, 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 because that pump basket is so impacted with debris and it's so thick that it won't crack, that it kind of just stops the flow, and the pump is just trying to pull the water through, and it's not working because that basket's really thick, full of debris. To me, I think that's kind of a problem. I like the Valpak baskets, don't get me wrong, only if you can ensure that that pump basket's never going to get full of debris like that and cause secondary problems. It actually shake the plumbing so violently that it could actually cause leaks in the plumbing, which I've seen before through certain unions that come loose when that pump is shaking. So I really prefer the OEM factory pump baskets, and if they tear, they tear, because that's kind of just the way the pump's going to do that in order for it to function. They get old and they start to get brittle, and that's fine. Now the pump baskets go in one direction usually only. This is kind of weird that I'm mentioning this, but I have to mention it because I've had customers put the pump basket in wrong. You may think this is impossible. It's not impossible. Even the whisper flow basket, where it has like a little notch where you can't really put it in wrong, I've had customers put them in sideways so that there's a hole in front of the pump basket. If you look at a picture of a pump basket or take yours out, you'll see a hole. Logically, that large hole should be facing the plumbing coming in so that the water can flow in there. But I have seen it, people putting the baskets in where that hole is sideways and you have the plastic mesh in front and water's hitting it and it's not functioning properly that way. So make sure the pump basket is in correctly. Usually if it's cracked on top, you can actually move it and position it wrong. Also check the back for cracks. This is what I talked about a lot, is that if there's a crack in the back of the pump basket by the impeller opening, debris is going to get into the impeller all week long and cause a problem. Now, one trick to keep the pump basket empty all the time is to use a skimmer sock or filter saver, and you put that in the skimmer basket, and that will actually protect it from having debris pulled in there. And this is a great product, easy to put on. It looks like it's like a pantyhose type material, and then you put it on the skimmer, put a rock in there to hold the skimmer basket down. And really nothing is going to get through the skimmer basket at that point into the pump basket. You're not going to have to empty the pump basket very often. Now, when you do empty the pump basket, again, that's the skimmer sock or filter saver or skimmer sock. You can find it on Amazon, and it's a great way to keep the pump basket from having any debris at all get in there. Also, if you have an automatic cleaner, like a suction side cleaner, I should say, specifically a suction side cleaner, have an inline canister and use a canister with a fine mesh bag like the large Hayward canister or the Pentair leaf trap canister. Those have a mesh bag. And when you empty the pump basket, you want to make sure that you refill the wet end with water. Now you can do this in several ways. The easiest way is to keep a bucket in the customer's equipment area, maybe a 5-gallon bucket or a 3-gallon bucket. I just go to the pool and dip it in the pool. And then I pour the water in, put the pump lid on, and it makes sure that that seals, and then I turn on the pump right away, and that primes it usually. If you have a Pentair filter with the large air relief valve on top, air bleeder on top, you can actually open that up, and then water will drain from the filter into the pump. That's only with the large Pentair air relief valve. The FNS Plus or the Clean and Clear Plus filters have that, and some other Pentair ones have that as well. I also like retrofitting all my Stay Right System 3 filters with this air relief valve on top. It makes priming the pump really easy. The Stay Right System 3 air bleeder is a joke on top. It doesn't even work. So I just retrofit them with the Clean and Clear Plus ones or the FNS Plus air bleeders. I'll give you the part number because it's easier if I just give you the part number. It's the 982-09800. 982-09800 high flow manual relief valve, air relief manual valve assembly with pressure gauge. And this is really nice because, again, you can open this up and then it'll drain some of the water from the filter into the pump. So here's how I do this. I'll take the pump lid off. I'll clean the pump basket out. I'll put the pump basket back in. I'll open up the air relief valve on top of the filter, and then water will fill up the pump. I'll put the lid back on, and then I'll turn on the pump, and I'll leave the air relief valve open, and then, of course, water will shoot out eventually, and then the pump will prime up pretty instantly. So this works on all the Pentair filters and also the Stay Right System 3 filter, and I really like this air relief valve. The Aquastar pipeline filter also has something very similar on top. You can do the same thing with that filter. When you have the pump basket out and emptied, put the basket back in, open up the air relief valve on top, and then basically water will drain from the filter into the pump, put the lid on, and away you go. I don't really like filling up the wet end with the garden hose. It takes forever sometimes, especially if there's low water pressure. So a bucket is the best. Keep a bucket back there. And you do really want to refill the wet end up with water. There are some instances where I've gotten lazy before, I'll admit it. I'll just empty the pump basket, I'll put the lid back on, and there's no bucket there, and I don't really want to get the hose, and I'll put the lid on, and I'll start the pump. It'll be like, and it just won't prime. And sometimes you can actually burn out an old motor this way. Not that I've done it. Okay, I've done it. You can actually burn out an old motor like this if it's on there and it's like 10 years old, and you're trying to prime it, and there's no water in there. This could happen. So you definitely want to fill it up every time to avoid that problem. Now there is something also, and this is kind of deviating a little bit from the pump basket. I know this is, but this is all related to the pump basket because when you empty, you got to add water. Another problem you may have after cleaning out the pump basket, putting water in there, putting a lid back on, the pump doesn't prime really well. There's still air inside the wet end. You'll see air. It's not full of water on top. And I should have said this at the beginning, but most wet ends should be completely full of water with no air in there. There's a few, the bigger ones that maybe there's some little bit of air in there, or if the pump's on low speed, there may be more air inside the pump wet end. But normally there's no air in there at all. It's just totally full of water, and it's going to prime up, no problem, because it should be a completely sealed system. So another issue is the lid O-ring. Sometimes simply lubing it with magic lube will get everything working fine. And replacing the lid O-ring is kind of critical as well. They wear out, you're taking that lid on and off there, and that O-ring will stretch out and it'll get brittle. And that needs to be replaced so that the pump will prime up easily. So find out your pump model number and match that O-ring and get a new O-ring, and sometimes that solves that problem of not having that pump fully priming. So as I near the 20-minute mark talking about the pump basket, there's probably still a few things I could cover, but I'll leave it at that. The pump basket is an essential component of your pool equipment. It's in the wet end of your pool pump. Checking it often for tears, making sure that it's empty and not full of debris is critical. You can, of course, minimize cleaning the pump basket by getting a filter sock or filter saver insert for the skimmer basket, and make sure the skimmer basket is always going to stay intact in the pool. I like putting a large rock in there, larger than the hole, of course, because you don't want that falling in there and clogging up the plumbing, but making sure the skimmer basket is intact with no tears in it. Empty the skimmer basket often, and of course using the filter saver is a great way to keep the pump basket free of debris. And I'm telling you, even a small amount of debris can slow the flow, especially if it's dog hair in there, it can slow the flow to the pool. So you want to keep the pump basket free of debris as much as possible. If you're looking for other podcasts, you can find those on my website, swimmingpoollearning.com. On the banner, click on the podcast icon. There'll be a drop-down menu of other podcasts I have recorded there. And if you're interested in the coaching program that I offer, you can learn more at poolguycoaching.com. Thanks for listening to this podcast. Have a great rest of your week. God bless. This episode is brought to you by HASA, providing products that deliver clean, healthy water for every aspect of everyday life. The bottom feeder battery-powered vacuum system, portable, powerful, and only weighs 12 pounds. And Skimmer. Get Skimmer, America's #1 pool service software. Podcast listeners can try Skimmer for free at getskimmer.com/poolguy.